My son looked me straight in the eye, in front of 40 people holding champagne flutes and said, "Mom, please? You're embarrassing yourself." Then he turned to the room and laughed, like it was a joke, like I was a joke, and nobody laughed with him. They just watched me the way people watch an accident they can't look away from. I set down my fork. I didn't cry. I reached into my purse, found my phone, and typed one name into my contacts. Franklin, send. If you've ever been made to feel small in a room by someone who was supposed to protect you, stay with me tonight. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one of them. I live in a narrow clapboard house on Birch Hollow Road, outside Mansfield, Ohio, the kind of house where the porch steps creak on the third one, no matter how many times you have them fixed. My husband Samuel built the little garden shed himself the summer before. He retired, and I still keep his reading glasses on the nightstand, even though it's been 6 years now since he passed. People think that's strange. I think it would be stranger to put them away. Most mornings I'm up before the sun, standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the mist come off the field behind the Delaney's place. I use the same percolator Samuel bought me for our 15th anniversary. The handle wobbles now. I keep meaning to replace it. I never do. Some things you hold on to, not because you need them, but because letting go of them would mean admitting something is really over. After Samuel died, the house went quiet in a way I still haven't gotten used to. I started leaving the radio on in the kitchen, just so there'd be a voice in the room besides my own thoughts. These days, I spend my time at the Mansfield Presbyterian Food Pantry on Tuesdays and Thursdays, tending my tomato beds, and waiting, if I'm honest, for my phone to ring. My son's name is Bradley Whitmore. When he was small, he used to run through this house so fast his socks would skid him straight into the refrigerator door, and I would scoop him up laughing, flour still on my hands from whatever I was baking. He used to tell his teachers his mother was the smartest woman in Ohio. That was a long time ago. Bradley calls now maybe once every couple of months. Christmas, sometimes. His birthday always, because I still call him on his birthday whether he wants me to or not. But 3 weeks before everything happened, my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon while I was folding laundry, and his name came up on the screen. And my whole chest did that thing it's done since he was 5 years old, that little leap. Like something good was about to happen. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, probably too eager. There was a pause before he answered, the kind that told me he was somewhere crowded, somewhere important. "Hey, Mom," I could hear voices behind him, glasses clinking, someone laughing too loud the way people do at cocktail parties. "Everything all right?" Yeah. Listen, I wanted to invite you down for something. Next Saturday. It's a big deal for me, career-wise. I made partner at the firm. We're having a dinner at the clubs to celebrate. Nicole's family will be there, some of the senior partners. I nearly dropped the shirt I was folding. "Bradley, that's wonderful. Of course I'll come." "Good," he said it fast, almost relieved like he'd been expecting an argument. "It's black tie. Well, cocktail attire at least. It matters a lot to me, Mom. This dinner." Something in the way he said it landed strange in my stomach. A small stone dropped into still water. But I told myself I was imagining things, because lonely women get good at imagining things, both the wonderful kind and the terrible kind. And it's hard sometimes to tell which is which until it's already happened. That night I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one where I keep things too precious to throw away, and not precious enough to display. Samuel's old watch, birthday cards Bradley made in grade school with crayon hearts on them, and folded in tissue paper at the bottom. A champagne-colored dress I hadn't worn since Samuel's retirement dinner 9 years ago. I held it up to the mirror. It still fit, more or less. I whispered to Samuel's photograph on the dresser, "Our boy invited me to something." For the 6 days after that call, I prepared like it was the most important event of my life, because it felt like it might be. I took the dress to Ruth's Alterations on Main to have the hem taken in. I polished my good shoes at the kitchen table with an old rag until my hands ached. I skipped my grocery trip that week, so I could afford to have Marilyn at the salon set my hair properly. And I told her simple was fine when she kept showing me pictures on her phone. Though the truth was I wanted, more than almost anything, to look like a mother my son could be proud to stand beside. 2 days before I left, my granddaughter Sophie called. She's 11. All elbows and opinions, and the second I heard her voice, my whole day brightened. "Grandma," she said, and then quieter, "Are you really coming Saturday?" "I sure am, baby." There was a silence on the line that didn't feel like an 11-year-old's silence. "Okay," she finally said. Then, almost too soft to hear, "Grandma, don't let them make you feel bad." My stomach dropped an inch. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" But before she could answer, I heard Nicole's voice cut through the background. "Sophie, homework," and the line went dead. I sat there holding my phone for a long minute, doubt creeping into a chest that had spent 6 days full of nothing but hope. But I've learned that hope is a stubborn thing in mothers. It survives longer than it has any right to. The morning of the dinner, I drove the 4 hours to Charleston myself, my hands tight on the wheel, the whole way. My good dress hanging in the back seat, wrapped in a garment bag Samuel used to use for his one nice suit. The city came up out of the low country like something from a postcard. Church steeples, wrought iron, the smell of salt in the air even from the highway. I checked into a modest hotel, changed, and took a cab to the club, because I didn't trust myself to find parking downtown in the dark. The Ashford Grove Country Club looked less like a place you eat dinner, and more like a place you'd get married in a movie. Stone columns, gas lanterns flickering along the drive, a valet in a white jacket who looked at my 10-year-old sedan a half second, too long before waving me toward the walk-up entrance instead. Inside, the hostess, a young woman with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, asked for the reservation name. "Whitmore," I said. "Bradley Whitmore." Her whole posture changed. "Oh, of course, ma'am. Right this way. They're in the Cypress room." As she led me through the main dining room, I felt eyes on me the way you feel weather changing. A pressure before you can name it. Women in beautiful dresses. Men laughing easily with drinks in hand. String music drifting somewhere I couldn't see. I was suddenly aware of my shoes, of the age in my hands, of the fact that my coat had been through 11 Ohio winters. Then I saw him, Bradley, in the center of a cluster of men in dark suits, laughing at something, his hand resting easily on the shoulder of a silver-haired man I recognized from the news. Harlan Voss, senior partner, the kind of man whose name gets attached to buildings. For one whole second before he saw me, I just watched my sun shine in a room, and pride filled me up so fast it nearly hurt. Then Bradley looked over and saw me, and something in his face closed like a door. He crossed the room quickly, and when I opened my arms he gave me a stiff half-hug instead, his eyes already flicking past me, checking who was watching. "You made it," he said, like it was a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered yes. "Of course I did. I wouldn't have missed this for the world." "Right." He glanced back toward the table. "Listen, Mom, just relax tonight, okay? Don't overdo the—" He gestured vaguely at me, at all of me, the small-town stuff. "These are serious people." I told him I was relaxed. I don't think either of us believed me. Nicole approached next, gorgeous in deep emerald silk, her smile thin as paper. "Frances," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek without touching me. "We weren't sure you'd actually drive all this way." "I said I'd be here," I answered simply. Harlan Voss came over next, extending a warm hand. "So this is the famous mother. Bradley talks about you." "All good things, I hope," I said, trying for light. Harlan chuckled. "He tells us you had it rough for a long time. Raised him mostly alone, I understand." "We got by," I said. Nicole slid in smoothly. "And look how far he's come." She said it with such pride in her voice, and such absence of me in the sentence, that the gap between he and we felt like a physical thing in my chest. Bradley steered me toward the long table set with candles and white orchids. Everyone seated there looked as though they'd stepped out of a magazine. Men discussing quarterly earnings. Women comparing renovation contractors. I sat carefully in the chair Bradley pointed me toward, and the conversation around me quieted just slightly, the way a room does when it's deciding what to make of someone new. "So, Frances," one woman asked with a polite smile, "what do you do?" I opened my mouth, but Nicole answered for me. "She keeps busy back home. Church things, mostly." Mostly. That word again, doing the work of erasing an entire life in one syllable. "I enjoy helping people," I said quietly. "That's sweet," the woman said, in the tone people use for children who've just shown them a drawing. A waiter came by with wine. Before he could pour for me, Bradley cut in. "She's fine with water." I looked at him, surprised. I wouldn't mind a glass, actually. Water's good, Mom. His smile didn't reach his eyes any more than Nicole's had. The waiter nodded awkwardly and moved on, and I felt heat climb up my neck, felt myself get smaller in my own chair. Dinner went on that way. Bradley talked with a confidence I barely recognized. Mergers, acquisitions, a lake house he and Nicole were closing on. Every few minutes his eyes would flick toward me, checking, worried, like I was a spill waiting to happen. At one point, Harlan leaned back in his chair. You know, Bradley, I respect a man who stays close to his family. Not enough of these young partners do. Family's everything to me, Bradley said smoothly. The lie sat in my chest, like a stone swallowed whole. Because in that moment, I understood something I'd been avoiding for a long time. I wasn't there because my son had missed me. I was there because I made a good story, a prop. Proof he hadn't forgotten where he came from, trotted out for exactly as long as it served him. Sophie appeared at my elbow then, and her hug, unlike every other greeting that night, was real. You look pretty, Grandma, she whispered. So do you, baby. She leaned in closer. I'm glad you came. Then, so quiet I almost missed it. Don't let them, okay? Sophie, sit up straight, Nicole said sharply from across the table, and my granddaughter obeyed instantly, the warmth draining out of the moment like water through a cracked cup. Later, as the entree arrived, I overheard two men near the end of the table murmuring, I thought his mother was, struggling, assisted living or something. That's what I heard too. My stomach fell through the floor. I looked at Bradley. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The wine incident happened not long after. A waiter, reaching to refill a glass, was jostled from behind, and red wine splashed across the front of my champagne dress. Gasps went up around the table. I'm so sorry, ma'am, the waiter stammered. It's all right, I said quickly, dabbing at it with my napkin. Accidents happen, Nicole exhaled dramatically. Oh, that's just unfortunate. Bradley's jaw went tight, not with concern for me, but with something colder. Can you please be careful for one night? He snapped, and the whole table went silent. I didn't do anything, Bradley. This dinner matters, Mom. You understand that, right? I said I was sorry. I whispered, though I hadn't done anything to be sorry for. He rubbed his forehead the way his father used to when he was frustrated. Except Samuel had never once used that gesture against me. You don't understand how these things look. And then, in front of 40 people, in front of his own daughter, my son said the thing that changed everything. He looked at me and said I was embarrassing myself. He said it like it was obvious, like it was simply a fact of the room, the way you'd note the temperature or the time. And when I didn't move fast enough to satisfy him, he turned to the waiter and asked, quietly, cruelly, if there was somewhere quieter I could sit. Near the back, he said, away from the main table, like I was something that needed hiding. I want to tell you, I made some grand, dignified speech in that moment. I didn't. I simply stood, smoothed my wine-stained dress with hands that had gone strangely steady, and said, It's all right, though nothing about it was. As the waiter led me to a small table tucked near the kitchen doors, I heard the whispers start behind me immediately. Rich people whisper best when they think no one's listening. I sat at that little table for a long moment, staring at my own folded hands. These hands had rocked my son through fevers, packed his lunches before dawn, scrubbed floors on my knees for 11 years after Samuel's construction business nearly went under before it finally found its feet. And tonight, those same hands were trembling with a humiliation I hadn't felt since I was a girl. A single tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away, reached into my purse, and dialed a number I hadn't used in almost 2 years. The line picked up on the second ring. Franklin Grady. I closed my eyes. Franklin. It's Francis. A pause, then his voice sharpened with attention the way it always did when something was wrong. Francis, what's happened? I looked across the restaurant, through the glass, at my son's laughing again with Harlan Voss, as though the last 5 minutes had never occurred. He showed me who he's become tonight, I said quietly. Franklin was silent for a long moment. I was afraid this day would come, so was I. Are you certain, Francis? Once we set this in motion, there's no walking it back quietly. I thought of Bradley at 7, running into my arms after school. I thought of him crying at his father's funeral, promising me through his tears that he would always take care of me. And then I thought of the last 5 minutes. Yes, I said. I'm certain. All right, Franklin said, his voice settling into the calm, careful register I remembered from the year after Samuel's death, when he'd guided me through more paperwork than I ever wanted to see again. Give me 20 minutes. I set the phone down on the little table and stared at my trembling hands in the low light of the kitchen doors swinging open and shut around me. A young waitress approached, gentle-faced, maybe 25. Ma'am, I'm so sorry about earlier. It wasn't your fault, dear. She hesitated, then said quietly, for what it's worth, nobody deserves to be talked to like that. I managed a small smile. Thank you. She glanced toward the private room and frowned. I think your granddaughter's trying to get over here. I turned in time to see Sophie slipping from her chair, only for Nicole to catch her wrist and pull her back, whispering something sharp in her ear. Sophie sat, but her eyes stayed locked on me across the room, and that, more than anything else that night, nearly broke me. Because children remember things like this forever. A few minutes later, Bradley approached my little table, his expression tight and irritated. Not ashamed. Annoyed. Mom, what are you doing over here? Sitting where you told them to put me. Can you not make this worse than it already is? Something bitter rose in my chest. Worse! I didn't realize humiliation came in levels, Bradley. His jaw tightened. You know what I mean? No, I said. I don't think I do. He lowered his voice. These are the senior partners, Mom. Tonight matters more than you understand, and I need you to. To what? For one flickering second, something like guilt crossed his face. Then it vanished. Please don't do this right now. Do this. As though grief was simply bad timing on my part. I studied my son under those soft club lights and understood, with a kind of cold clarity, that he genuinely believed he was the injured party tonight. Not me. Him. Before I could answer, a stir near the entrance caught the whole room's attention. A tall woman in a tailored navy suit came through the doors with purposeful steps, and every staff member she passed straightened visibly. Patricia Lowell. I recognized her at once, the regional director who oversaw the club's operations. Bradley's face brightened. Good, he muttered. Maybe she can smooth this over. Smooth this over. As if the problem tonight was public relations. Patricia spoke briefly with the hostess. Then a manager hurried to her, pale-faced, and pointed toward my little table. Patricia's expression shifted the instant she saw me. Shock, then something like alarm. And she came straight to me, moving past Bradley entirely. Mrs. Whitmore, she said. I am so sorry, I had no idea you were here tonight. Bradley blinked. You? You know my mother? Patricia looked at him for the first time, and there was no warmth in it. I know exactly who your mother is. Something in her tone made Bradley's easy confidence falter for the first time all night. There's clearly been a misunderstanding, he said, forcing a laugh, gesturing at me like I was a small inconvenience that had gotten out of hand. A misunderstanding, Patricia repeated flatly. Her eyes moved over the wine stain on my dress, the isolated table, the tears I hadn't fully managed to hide. When she looked back at Bradley, her face had changed, not professionally. Personally, disappointed. Clear the private room, she told the manager. Bradley's mouth fell open. You can't do that. My partners are. I heard you. Patricia's voice was quiet steel. Clear the room. By now, half the restaurant had gone still, pretending not to watch while absolutely watching, because that's what wealthy people do. They observe scenes with their whole attention while their faces stay perfectly composed. Patricia turned to me gently. Would you prefer somewhere more comfortable, Mrs. Whitmore? I'm all right here, I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. No, ma'am, you're not. She turned to the hovering manager. Prepare the founder's room. The words visibly confused the guests around us. Bradley stared. What founder's room? Patricia didn't answer him. She simply looked at me, silently asking permission for something. I hesitated, because once truth enters a room like that, nothing that comes after is ever the same. Then I nodded. Mrs. Frances Whitmore, Patricia said, turning to address Harlan Voss and the others who'd gathered near the doorway, is the majority family shareholder of the Ashford Grove Club Group. Silence dropped over the room like a curtain. Harlan blinked. The Ashford Grove Group owns this club and half the properties on the peninsula. Yes, Patricia said. Nicole's face lost every trace of color. Bradley shook his head slowly. No, that's not possible. You own this place, he said to me, And his voice had gone thin and young, nothing at all like the confident man who'd walked me past him 2 hours before. "I own considerably more than this place," I said quietly. Sophie stared at me with wide eyes, somewhere between fear and wonder. "Grandma?" I gave her a sad smile. Harlan slowly loosened his tie. "Well," he murmured, "this evening just got a great deal more interesting." But Bradley wasn't listening to Harlan anymore. He was staring at me the way you stare at a stranger who's just told you, your whole life has been a story someone else was writing. The room seemed to reorganize itself around me after that, quietly, like gravity shifting direction. A few minutes earlier I'd been the embarrassment shuffled off toward the kitchen. Now waiters stood a little straighter when I passed. Managers murmured into headsets. The investors who'd barely glanced at me all evening now couldn't look away. "You're lying," Bradley said to Patricia, though there was no real conviction left in it. "I assure you, Mr. Whitmore, I would never joke about ownership structures." Nicole turned to me slowly, all her earlier polish gone, replaced by something rawer. "You never told us any of this. You never asked," I said. Harlan stepped forward, his businessman's instincts fully awake now. "Mrs. Whitmore, forgive me, but if this is true, why live so modestly?" I almost smiled because wealthy people always ask that question, as though money exists only to be worn. "Because I know what it feels like not to have any," I said simply. "Expensive things never made me feel safe. Only the people I loved did that." Patricia gestured toward a side hallway. "Perhaps we should continue this privately." Bradley stepped forward immediately. "Good idea." Patricia stopped him with a single look. "You weren't invited." The words landed on him like a slap in front of every person he'd spent the evening trying to impress. Inside the founder's room, the noise of the main club faded to almost nothing. Patricia pulled out a chair for me before I could do it myself. "You don't need to do that," I told her. "Yes," she said gently. "I do." She sat across from me. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Whitmore. I should have recognized the reservation name sooner. How could you have known?" She looked genuinely troubled. "When Mr. Grady called ahead, I came as fast as I could." At the mention of Franklin's name, I nodded slowly. "He's probably on his way now." A soft knock came a few minutes later, and the door opened to reveal Franklin himself. 74 years old, gray-suited, carrying himself with the same careful dignity he'd had at Samuel's funeral 15 years ago. His eyes went straight to the stain on my dress, and his face darkened. "He did this." I looked away. Franklin exhaled slowly. "I told Samuel this day might come." Hearing my husband's name out loud made my throat tighten. "You all right?" Franklin asked. "No," I admitted. "Not really." He set a thick leather folder on the table between us, and Patricia glanced at it with quiet understanding. My stomach twisted, because now this was becoming real. "Permanent." Franklin sat beside me. "You still have time to walk away from this tonight, Francis. Go home. Let it be a bad evening and nothing more." I knew exactly what he meant. I could protect Bradley the way I always had, the way mothers so often confuse protection with love. But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me across that table, like I was something to be managed, contained. "Hidden." "No," I said. "I'm certain." Franklin studied me a long moment, then nodded and opened the folder. The knock that came a few minutes later sounded almost ceremonial. Bradley entered first, his suit still perfectly pressed, though the confidence inside it had already begun to collapse. Nicole followed, arms crossed tightly. Harlan came with 2 other partners, whose faces had shifted from amusement to real concern. Sophie slipped in last, and walked straight to my side without being asked. "Can someone please explain what's happening?" Bradley said, his voice carrying irritation, not remorse. Franklin removed his glasses calmly. "You're about to learn something your father intended for you to understand only when the time was right." Bradley frowned. "What does Dad have to do with any of this?" At the mention of Samuel, something tightened in the room, because for all his success, my son still carried one wound beneath everything else, the loss of his father. Franklin folded his hands. "Before your father died, he structured several investment trusts to protect this family long term." "My father ran a small construction outfit," Bradley scoffed. "He wasn't some financial mind." "No," Franklin said quietly. "He was a very intelligent man who happened to work with his hands. There's a difference." He slid a set of documents across the table. These are partnership agreements your father entered into 22 years ago. I closed my eyes as the memory came back to me. Samuel, at our old kitchen table, late at night, papers spread out under the lamp, calculator clicking. One of his closest friends from the trade, a man named Emmett Novak, had dreamed of turning one small clubhouse restaurant into something bigger. But no bank would take a chance on a man with Emmett's background and no collateral. Samuel believed in him anyway. We put in nearly everything we'd saved. I thought he was out of his mind, I said softly. We barely had enough for ourselves. But your father kept saying the same thing. People underestimate quiet men far too often. After Samuel died, Emmett kept buildings, slowly. One clubhouse became 3. 3 became the Ashford Grove Group. And through every acquisition, our family's stake stayed protected. Quietly, privately, exactly as Samuel had arranged. Your father retained controlling family shares before he passed, Franklin said. Bradley stared blankly. That's not possible. It is, Franklin said and slid a second set of documents forward. The seed capital for your firm's first major real estate fund, the one that made your name at the firm, came through a family trust your mother authorizes. The room went utterly silent. No, Bradley said, his voice smaller now. I built that fund myself. You built it, Franklin said, using capital your mother quietly made available to you. I watched something crack open across my son's face, piece by piece, because his entire public identity rested on one story. The self-made man, no favors, no family money, just grit. And now that story was collapsing in front of his partners, his wife, his daughter, everyone. Harlan leaned back slowly. So the capital came through family channels, protected family channels, and Bradley never disclosed it. I didn't know, Bradley said. You represented yourself as fully independent to this firm, Harlan said, and his voice had gone from warm to careful. That's a problem, Bradley, not a small one. Nicole finally spoke, her voice cracking. You told everyone you built this from nothing. You made me believe your mother was some woman just barely scraping by. Bradley started. You let me think I was marrying beneath my family, Nicole said, and there was real anger under the hurt now. You let me look down on her. I lowered my eyes because hearing it said aloud stung more than I'd expected it to. Sophie's small hand found mine under the table and I squeezed it gently. Bradley suddenly stood pacing. This is insane. Why is everyone acting like I did something criminal? Nobody said criminal, Franklin said evenly. Yet, Bradley froze. What does that mean? Patricia stepped forward carefully. There are some expense irregularities flagged in the firm's review of your accounts, Bradley. Personal travel routed through client development budgets. A boat, I believe, categorized as a networking asset. Bradley's face went pale. That's standard practice. It isn't, Harlan said coldly. Franklin reopened the folder and drew out a final set of papers. There's something else you should know. Your father built protective language into the family trust. If the primary beneficiary is found to have engaged in serious financial misconduct, or conduct the trustees deem harmful to the family's integrity, controlling authority reverts to the trust holders. Bradley stared. Who's the trust holder? Your mother, Franklin said quietly. The silence that followed felt like the whole room holding its breath at once. You'd really do this? Bradley said, turning to me. Something raw and frightened breaking through the anger now. Take everything I built. You built it, I said softly. With help you refused to acknowledge, and tonight, in front of 40 people, you told me I was an embarrassment to sit beside. So no, Bradley, this isn't revenge. It's a consequence, and you built it yourself, one small unkindness at a time. His breathing had gone shallow. I didn't mean, you meant every word, Nicole said, quietly. I watched your face when you said it. Sophie, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke, her voice trembling. Dad, why were you so mean to Grandma? The question landed harder than anything Franklin or Harlan had said all night, because there is no elegant answer to cruelty, especially not to a child who loves you. Bradley sank into a chair and put his face in his hands. 3 weeks passed before I saw my son again. The board suspended his authority pending review. Word moved quietly but quickly through Charleston's tighter circles, the way these things do. A partner, stepping back, re-evaluating priorities. Nobody used the word disgraced out loud, but everyone understood it. Sophie called almost every evening, sometimes just to do her homework while I stayed on the line. Nicole called once too, her voice tired in a way I recognized. I don't know who he is anymore, she said. He's trying, Francis. I don't know if he understands himself yet, but he's trying. I didn't know either. That was the frightening part. Then one Thursday evening, just after the sun went down, someone knocked softly on my front door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Mothers always know. Bradley stood on my porch in jeans and work boots, no watch, no tailored anything. An old pickup parked at the curb where his sedan usually would have been. "Hi, Mom," he said, and his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I stepped back and let him in. He looked around the living room, like he was seeing it for the first time in years. The faded couch, the family photographs, his father's old recliner still sitting untouched by the window. "It still smells like cinnamon in here," he said. "I baked earlier." He nodded, and silence settled heavy between us as I made 2 cups of coffee. When I set his down in front of him, I noticed his hands, rough now, red at the knuckles, nothing like the smooth hands that had waved a waiter away from pouring me wine. "You're working?" I asked gently. "Maintenance, at one of the clubs. The board said, if I want any real chance of coming back, I start from the ground up. Every part of it." Something shifted in my chest, because for the first time in years he sounded less like an executive and more like the boy his father had raised. He wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't drink from it. "I hated being poor," he finally said. "I mean, I really hated it, Mom. I hated the way kids used to laugh at Dad's truck. I hated pretending I didn't notice when other families had more than we did." His voice cracked. "I hated watching you come home so tired you could barely stand, and pretending you weren't." Tears filled my eyes, because I never knew how much he'd noticed. "I think somewhere along the way," he went on, "I decided that being successful meant becoming someone completely different from who we were, and when people reminded me where I came from, I panicked. That's not an excuse, it's the truth. I saw your face after you said it," he whispered, "and I kept going anyway. I don't know how to forgive myself for that." I looked at my son for a long time before I asked, quietly, "Why did you come tonight?" "Because losing the firm scared me," he said. "But losing you scared me more." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid something across the table. An old photograph, folded soft at the creases. Samuel and me, standing on either side of Bradley at his college graduation, all 3 of us grinning like fools. "I found it in my desk drawer," he said. "And I realized my whole life I've been trying to become successful enough to stop feeling ashamed. But Dad never looked ashamed. Not once, not even during the hardest years." I reached across the table and took his hand the way I used to when he was small and afraid of the dark. "You can change," I told him, "but not while people keep saving you from what you've done." He nodded, tears sliding freely down his face now, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my son cried in front of me without hiding it. I held him the way I did when he was 5, not because he'd earned forgiveness yet, but because healing has to start somewhere, and it might as well start at my kitchen table. 6 months later, that same table was full again. Not with partners, not with strangers admiring each other's watches, with family. Sophie laughing too loud at something. Nicole helping me carry dishes in from the kitchen. Bradley setting the table because he noticed I was carrying too much, not because anyone was watching. He'd spent those months doing exactly what the board asked. Grounds work, maintenance shifts, learning every property from the bottom instead of the top. He hated it at first. I could hear it in his voice every time we spoke, but slowly something in him loosened. "You know something strange," he told me one evening on the phone. "I never learned most of these guys' names before. The maintenance crew. 12 years working there, and I never once asked." That sentence stayed with me for days. Tonight, watching him across my old dining table, I saw a man lighter than the one who'd walked past me at that club 6 months ago. Not poorer, lighter. "I used to hate this house," he said quietly, out of nowhere, and before anyone could react, he kept going. "Not because of the house, because I associated it with feeling small." He looked around the room slowly. The photographs, his father's chair, me. "I think this was the richest place I ever lived." Sophie frowned at him. "I still can't believe you told Grandma she was embarrassing you." Bradley closed his eyes. "Believe me, I can't either." He looked at me then, really looked. You know what the craziest part is? I always thought money made people important. But the person everyone in that room respected most in the end was you. No, sweetheart, I said softly. It was never about respect. He waited. It was about remembering we belonged to each other before we belonged to anything else. My son sat with that for a long moment. And then he nodded. Slow and certain. And for the first time in years I saw something in his eyes that wasn't hunger. Just peace. Outside, the Ohio evening was settling gold across the fields the way it always does this time of year. And around my old table, laughter kept rising and falling, easy now, unguarded. The kind of sound this house hadn't held in a very long time. No crystal, no Valis, no watching eyes. Just people who had nearly lost each other, learning, one small honest thing at a time, how to come home.